So the original vision was we wanted to automate security compliance for companies starting with startups, starting with SOC 2. Did YC in early 2018, so this was like March, April 18. And so I walked around SoMa, walked around this neighborhood, pitching VCs and being like, but all your startups will get SOC 2s and it will be magical and it is this wedge into security and it will take over the world because there's more security verification needed and blah, blah, blah.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This is fantastic to be actually live at an event in San Francisco. We are here for the second episode of Between Two Founders. Really fun opportunity to learn from super experienced, successful founders. We hope to share tactical advice that can be as helpful as possible. We'll save a bunch of time for Q&A at the end, so please save your questions. I'm more than happy to answer anything. Before we get started, I just want to also give a huge thank you for those of you who tried the wine. This is a really fun partnership. Sleeping Giant Winery is a small family-owned organic winery in Carneros, Southern Napa. It's been an honor to work with them for this event, so I hope you gave that a shot. But most importantly, we are here to talk about startups. So quick introduction, I'm Jeff Seibert. I'm the founder and CEO of Digits. We help automate accounting for pre-seed to Series B startups, trying to take it off your mind as founders, so please chat with anyone on our team. And more excitingly, I'm here with Christina Cacioppo. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So exciting to do this together. It's been so fun watching your career, watching you build this business. At Digits, we're actually customers of Vanta. It's been a fantastic product to work with. We got our SOC 2 compliance, so thank you. And so I want to dive into all sorts of different questions all about startups. But most importantly, to start, you are fresh off a monster Series C, 150 million. Huge congrats. Tell us a little bit about what that fundraise process was like.
Yeah. So at this point, it is very much a numbers game, which in some ways I find actually easier because, you have to do the work up front to make sure you're doing all your finances correctly, your accounting correctly, which at various points in Vanta history we were not. We are now, especially on this recorded tape. But anyway, you're doing all of this preparation work, and you kind of go pitch, but you're actually often pitching to folks you've been talking to. I think the truism of investors invest in lines, not dots. If anyone remember that blog post from 15 years ago, they don't invest after one magical meeting. They invest after a series of meetings where they can see the founder of the company progressing. Anyway, so you're kind of going out and talking to people who are somewhat familiar with the company. You've talked to them before. You come with all of these numbers and all of this data. And then it kind of just becomes a conversation around that. And it's, a lot of what is your growth rate? Why do you think that will stay the same or increase at these big numbers? And in some ways I find it an easier conversation than the early rounds because it's just rooted in numbers, right? And you can kind of, it's kind of that's where, I think my confidence comes from, where you're look, these are just good, right? And, you can, decide you don't like the company or not, but it's hard to argue with some of the numbers. And the conversation just around that.
And in the climate, there's been a lot of discussion on it's much harder to raise now than it was a couple of years ago. Did you experience that, or at the later stages, it's just far more sort of disciplined on the numbers?
Yeah, this is disciplined on the numbers, right? So I think you do, it's probably harder, in fact, if you don't show up with numbers and, or you're still kind of trying to pitch a dream or a vision without numbers and you're years into the company, right? Then it's just well, why haven't you produced any numbers yet? It's what have you been doing with your time? But I think that, investors, VCs all raised big funds in the last couple of years, especially in the 2020, 21, early 22 cycle. And so they have big funds. They do want to invest. They're basically paid when they invest. And so they're very motivated to invest. So they do, they definitely take meetings. They want to look at stuff. They want to do things. It's just, can they make the numbers make sense?
Totally. For the founders here, what metrics do they care most about? What numbers should you really pay attention to?
At what stage?
Well, I guess early stage, but then how does that change, right?
So, okay, yeah. So it is what stage, but also kind of all ARR, but ARR growth rate, really more, actually almost more than ARR. It's how quickly is that growing on a weekly, monthly, annual basis? In the early days of Vanta, and I'd say basically, 500K, we kept this running for till much later, but kind of 500K onward, we set ourselves a 3% weekly growth rate. And that was the field. And we were weekly 3%. And like literally I just had a spreadsheet where I like dragged times 1.03 to the right. And like that was the sales goal. So that was a little extreme, but that's one way to do it. I think as you get bigger, people look at the difference between the growth rate on ending ARR. So that's like at the end of, July this year versus July last year, say. So it's like end ARR difference versus the difference in net new ARR. So how much did you like add in July this year versus add in July last year? And basically that's usually slower. Things converge to that rate over time. So if that rate is going faster, everyone gets like very excited. That is like generally a like great sign. But so ARR growth rate, end ARR growth rate, net new ARR growth rate, and then retention, right? But I think there is actually a lot of leeway, especially in the early days around retention, because I think often startups, when I speak to Vanta, it's like, we didn't have our arms around a renewal motion. We definitely did not upsell. And so our net retention wasn't very good. We had no way to upsell, either in terms of people, product, or even pricing. And we can kind of talk around that for a while. At some point, you have to like actually address that. But I think at the early stages, retention is just used as a proxy for like, do you have product market fit? Are you building something people want? Once they buy it or sign up for it, do they keep using it, right? Like those are more the questions. And then it's like, okay, if that's true, you should probably be able to like layer things on top.
So let's go back to the beginning. So for those here not familiar with Vanta, what was the original vision when you started, and how did you get investors excited about that?
Oh, I didn't. No, this is good. So actually a couple weeks ago, I excavated this seed deck. So I actually have this more, like semi more accurately. So the original vision was we wanted to automate security compliance for companies starting with startups, starting with SOC 2. And that went out, did YC in early 2018, so this was like March, April 18. And at the time, startups did not get SOC 2s. And so I walked around SoMa, like walked around this neighborhood, pitching VCs and being like, but all your startups will get SOC 2s and it will be magical and it is this wedge into security and like, it will take over the world because there's more security verification needed, blah, blah, blah. And the nice VCs would look at me and go, but my startups don't get SOC 2s. Also, what is a SOC 2? Literally. And you're like, well, I know they don't today, but like they will in the future. And like, here's the macro trends that will like lead that, anyway. And I think the people who invested, we did raise money. Because I think one of the magical things about fundraising is underappreciated is you only need like one yes. You can in fact have a terrible hit rate. You can go like 1 for 20 and you feel terrible and still succeed in fundraising. And that is, I think, anyway, underappreciated, at least by me. I think that's also why fundraising often feels so terrible, even when it's working. Is going 1 for 20 isn't fun. But anyway, I think the VCs that invested were like, this idea only sort of makes sense. But, these people have shiny backgrounds. They seem like they'll work hard. They want to do a startup. Sure, like, give them $1 million. And it was much more that bet. And I think a lot of them, pretty much all of them, thought we would pivot.
And so I want to bring this up actually because the world has changed so much since then. Yeah. You raised $1 million. What were the terms, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh yeah, so it was actually 3 on a set of safes that were like 18 cap.
Okay. And so that was the original vision. As you've built, sort of, have there been pivots? How's the vision shifted?
It's funny, yeah. I mean, yes and no. Like no, actually, or in some ways, and it's over time, we've gotten to do more and more of that. At the time, as much as I was like, every startup will get SOC 2, sparkle fingers. He estimated the market size at the time of like, we thought there were like 500 to 600 SOC 2s done in the world. And we thought we could make that number bigger. But if you had told me that like I'd be sitting here in 2024 and Vanta would have 8,000 customers, I would have just laughed at you and then asked why you were being so mean, like teasing me. So anyway, so early on we were like petrified by capping out on SOC 2 and needing to make more products. And the funny tension of Vanta is that actually worked really well. Like, turns out SOC 2 factories are much larger than we ever thought. But I think back to that vision, like we never wanted to build a SOC 2 factory. Mm-hmm. SOC 2 was always, this is the, first like de facto way for a company to demonstrate it has reasonable security. we're in the game of helping companies build out their security and demonstrate it to customers and prospects. SOC 2 is a useful tool to that end, but it's not special otherwise. And so I think the vision, but like, kind of overall vision stayed the same. There were definitely times where I was like, man, am I just like one of these, I don't know, Adam Newman founders who is saying something crazy, and then like we're building a SOC 2 factory every day. But I think one of the rewarding things is over time, as we've kind of again, built more and more of the product and been able to take on, adjacent product areas, more security focused features, like other ways besides SOC 2 for a company to demonstrate its security, like questionnaires or trust centers or whatever, just kind of like, so yes and no, or maybe the overarching vision kind of remarkably, I think, the same, but the ways we've worked on it has changed.
And so let's imagine, so you're out raising an early stage round today, put yourself back in these shoes. How much in that pitch do you focus on the sort of grand vision of like what you could do, right? Versus the like, oh, we're doing SOC 2 now. Yeah.
So I actually think this is a very like what makes you confident, like it's a personal question, not in a sensitive way, but just in a like what makes you confident. And I think the thing that I've learned makes me confident is talking to customers. And if I talk to customers, I have this like clear story. And if I don't talk to customers, I get very wishy-washy. And so I think for me, it would be like, look, we want to do this big thing, but here's where we're starting today, and here's why it's working, and here's why people like it. And then over time, you can believe it builds to this thing. But like, I would I want to tell both, and probably I'd be more on the like, here is what we are doing today and why it is working.
I totally agree. It's like, here's a very crisp view of how we get to this like real market today.
Yep. And
it has the potential to be massive if we do X, Y, Z.
Right. Yeah.
Totally. All right. Take me back before you started Vanta. How did you get interested in security and compliance? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah. So I'll tell you both stories. There's two stories. One we tell both publicly, but one more than the other. So they're both true. So the cleaner story, which is true, is prior to Vanta, I was a PM at Dropbox. I was working on a new product at the time, trying to take Dropbox Paper, which is sort of Notion without the sidebar, you could call it, not what we called it at the time, to market. It was actually an acquired company, so separate tech stack. And I was the PM who was getting new customers from the Dropbox customer base, thinking I was like the best PM in the world. I thought I was so good at my job. And then the legal team walked to my desk and was like, what the heck are you doing? You were basically like inducing people to violate their Dropbox contracts. And I was kind of like, what do you say? What's a contract? Anyway, and it turns out Dropbox had these contracts that said, Dropbox is secure, compliant, pen tested, vulnerability monitored, HIPAA, like da-da-da-da-da. And our product was none of those things. And so that's when I first learned about this world. And it was in the like, hey, we can pause all product development for a year and a half, take all of our engineers who are building features, trying to get to product market fit, and in fact, to have them like pull screenshots for EY auditors and try to explain, what the heck encryption is and what the heck different AWS services are to them. Or we can ignore all that, which are like, great, that stuff sounds terrible, and just go to market a different way. And I think there are many reasons. I don't know how many people in the room, probably no one in this room uses Dropbox Paper today, but I think that was one of the decisions that, in retrospect, I look back on and was like, that was probably not the right decision. But at the time, again, we were kind of a startup within a company, and we didn't have product market fit. And so the idea of delaying learning from customers for 2 years to, again, go pull screenshots and spend time with accountants did not seem prudent. You'd think the story would end with this like giant light bulb and ergo Vanta. That's not how that story ends. And that was just like, I don't know, I'm not smart enough. Moved on. The second part of the story was about a year and a half later, had left Dropbox, was searching for a startup idea, had kind of hit rock bottom in the like, walking through the desert, trying to find an idea. Everything was sad. And so it was like, well, I'm just like interested in security. I really like the Dropbox security team. I think they have cool jobs. I don't know if I'd ever want to be a security engineer, but like, I'm not sure what I'm doing with my life anyway. And so if I just spend 3 months learning about what security engineers do, it's better than what I'm doing now. And so started talking to every technical founder, security engineer, business founder, head of engineering, sales leader even, about security, who would give me time. And it started with friends and former colleagues and then friends of them, and kind of spiraled out. And I think through that would like ask founders, There's all these security products out in the market, these big security companies with all this revenue that have so many acronyms, and like, don't really understand it yet, but like, what do you do, young startup, for security? And generally the founders would look back at me guiltily and say like, kind of nothing. And sometimes I feel badly and I'd like to do something, or like, I read this cool Hacker News post and like, I'd like to like mess with something, but I mostly get up every day and I build features customers want. Because we're a startup trying to find product market fit, right? Like, why would I stop and lock all the doors and windows of my house when no one wants to visit my house? Like, I want to solve that problem first. Anyway. And this was all true until I walked into one company that's about 30 people. It's now much larger. And I sat down with their infra engineer and I kind of asked him my questions, assuming he'd say, well, we do nothing. And he, in fact, ranted off like 100 things he did, like all these tools they bought. We have laptop protection. We just bought Okta. We are deploying CrowdStrike. We have all of these tools around AWS. We implemented Cynic, like just kept going. And I was just being like, who are you? Like, Matthew, like, who are you? And he was like, well, look, we just closed a contract with Google. We're a 30-person company, right? It's like a really big deal. And as part of that contract, they sent us this questionnaire. And I looked at it and they had all these security questions, like, do you protect laptops? What do you use for endpoint protection? Like, describe your vulnerability management and patching process. And the answer to all of these questions was like, no, or like, don't know. But I didn't want to write that back to Google. So I wrote yes to all the questions. And then I went shopping. And then I like did all of this. Right. And now at this moment of like, whoa, that is like motivation, a purchase trigger, intent, prioritization, like I have not seen. And it was kind of then went back deep on security questionnaires, got back to compliance, and it was like, oh, that crazy thing from the screenshots and, the like accountants, like, what was that? And that was sort of when the pieces came together. And then, it's another kind of month of validating, but like those were sort of like the real two sides of the story, which I do like telling, because I think a lot of people just tell the light bulb piece. And I think light bulbs are actually much more rare than the stories suggest.
I mean, it's a whole journey of discovery and learning and talking with so many people to bring you that.
Yes.
And so you start the company, you're sort of off and running, you shape the initial product. Was there a moment where you're like, oh no, this is not going to work at all?
Oh, totally. Oh, absolutely.
What was that like?
Oh yeah, at the beginning it was like, well, SOC 2, it's not standardized. So how do you automate something that is like bespoke everywhere? And when you go talk to people, SOC 2 consultants or people who've done it, they say, oh, this thing is totally bespoke. You can't, automate it. Which was like really unfortunate. I think the way we tackled that one was actually just decided to test it, which was read every SOC 2 report we could get our hands on, which was only like 10 at the time. It was like Salesforce, Slack, Dropbox, AWS, Google, whatever. And just open them and was like, okay, how different are they? Like, go to CC 1.4 of the report. Like, how different are these things? And turns out they're not different. Like, that is kind of the secret, right? They're different wording, but a lot of the best practices are best practices for a reason. Mm-hmm. And you can 80-20 this, especially for a small company. It gets more complicated as companies scale. But you could 80-20 it with best practices pretty far. And I think that was one of the big unlocks that took this from you can't automate this thing to like, oh, actually you can, for cloud-based companies that are getting off the ground and want to follow best practices and want to do the right thing. But that was probably, I say it quickly, but that was probably like 3 weeks. And 3 weeks of like, oh, you can't do this. Everyone, like literally everyone is telling us you can't do this.
And I'm curious, like a lot of this actually was put in place by the AICPA, the accounting industry.
Oh yeah, you know the AICPA.
We know them very well.
Yeah.
What has your interaction been? Have you engaged with any of the actual regulators?
We try. We have. I think what we find is the AICPA is very focused on financial accounting and financial audits, and that's what most of their rules are based around. The like kind of IT attestation, which is this part of it, is a bit of is not nearly as big or not nearly as powerful. I think also for a while the organization just didn't know what to do with tools, and didn't know, it's like, well, are you building Digits? Like, are you building QuickBooks, but for IT controls? And you're like, well, only kind of. So we've had a little bit of conversation with them, but would like to have more. And I think actually the thing that would be really helpful to us is so much of, again, the professional obligations and the membership requirements are oriented around financial audits, and the IT stuff is just fuzzier. And we just want clarity. Like, there's a bunch of parts where you can kind of interpret it multiple ways. And some earlier startups, but like, you're happy with like going left or right. It is just guidance from the AI CPA on which direction they prefer their members to go.
Makes sense. All right, so let's shift gears to sort of new technology coming out. For years, it was the blockchain craze. Now, fortunately, we're on to AI. I'm curious, so you're building a growing company, you're serving customers. How do you think about staying on top of the latest tech trends without getting caught up in the hype and sort of wasting time down these paths?
That's a great question. I will answer it. Did anyone ever ask you to put audits on the blockchain?
Oh, they want to put accounting on the blockchain, and we're like, no.
We typed this
No.
down. So I think there's there's a general, like, does this make any sense? But what do I think? On like trying to figure out which of these are kind of dark alleys for audits on the blockchain and which aren't, like some of the LLM stuff, I think you just have to try it, right? And I think it helps as a founder. It helps as like, engineers at the company, PMs at the company, whatever. But just trying to try some of this stuff. I think as a company gets bigger, trying to figure out who on the team is actually like really interested in, what AI now, but whatever it is, and how you can kind of like elevate them and like support them in doing that. Just gotta try stuff.
I guess maybe a different way to look at it, like as you're thinking about sort of company priorities, what percent are focused on sort of core customer requests, like long-term roadmap versus like exploratory projects?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. We probably, say we do whatever 60, 30, 10, like whatever ratio you're like supposed to do. And I'm sure we don't actually do that because we definitely don't track it that way. What do I think? I think what we actually try to do, and I feel like we have done with AI, is very customer focused or customer problem focused, but like what tools are you using to solve it with? And so like with AI in particular, we've actually deployed very little ourselves internally for our own internal stuff. I know a lot of companies have like built their own AI BDRs or done call coaching for reps or something. We haven't done any of that. All of our AI work has been customer focused. And so, and I think in your business too, probably ours is a lot of taking text in one format and putting it in another. Config to policy to test, like all sorts of things, control to policy, whatever it is. And so there's like a lot of stuff that's been very neat. But all with the lens of like, what is a customer getting here?
Yep, totally. As you've looked out at the market, like, are there any particular technologies or startups up and coming that you're like super excited by?
Let's see. I do like, some of the LLM stuff is really interesting. We were talking about this earlier. I do think a lot of if I were starting an AI startup, and I can be overly skeptical, so take this with a block of salt, but I would, if I'm going up against an incumbent and saying like my advantage is AI, I would want to convince myself the incumbent is going to be sleepy and not build AI. Which is true of some incumbents, it's not true of others, but like deeply want to convince myself of that. Because I think incumbents are generally less sleepy now than they were, 10, 20 years ago. I can be overly skeptical on these things, though, so your mileage may vary. But I do think there's like a bunch of stuff to do there.
I would just add on that, actually. I think that's exactly right, because there are so many startups actually making AI easier for incumbents to adopt, because that's the bulk of the market, that a lot of them are going to be able to bolt on AI features relatively quickly. It's more, do they face a structural or architectural reason that will prevent them from using AI to the same extent as a new entrant?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then, there's a lot of reasons to believe that. I mean, there's a whole trust piece for a while, but I think, startups have much higher risk tolerances, deservedly so, on erroneous answers or slightly kooky answers, right, than, larger brands. And I do think there's some mileage there. If enough, there's totally a thing there.
Right. You don't want your compliance hallucinating.
Right. Yeah. Tried really hard to make that not happen. That's some of it.
So let's go back to product market fit, because this is probably one of the hottest topics in startups. It is a journey. We've been through it many times. You went through it. It can be elusive. what were sort of the twists and turns or the biggest surprises as you tried to hit PMF?
Yeah, we did it, and we built Vanta in kind of a funny way, which is my co-founder and I could both code, which was it's good, clearly. But we'd also built a bunch of things that were in a ton of code for products that nobody wanted, which is fun in the moment and then like kind of very demoralizing. And so our thing was we were not allowed to code until several people wanted to give us money. And so we spent 6 months or so paper prototyping, like Wizard of Oz prototyping the idea. And what that actually looked like was like building versions of the product in spreadsheets, being SOC 2 consultants, writing reports manually and telling people software wrote them so they would be meaner and critique it more. But we basically had like figured out a lot of the product in spreadsheets. And then truly got to a point where we were kind of getting inbound emails from people saying like, I hear you've become a SOC 2 consultant. I'm not sure why your life went so off the rails, but can you like come to my company and do that? And then maybe we should also get a drink because like, what are you doing? And so we actually kind of got to a point where it was like, oh, if we can build this thing, or this was actually fairly early, if we can build the easy button for SOC 2, we were quite confident lots of startups would hit it. The question was, could we build the easy button for SOC 2? And so that was what the like Wizard of Oz prototyping was designed for. And so I think we spent, anyway, 6 months. And so by the time we started actually writing TypeScript, like it was overwhelming and intimidating, but it was like, oh, if we can build this, this will work. It's just like, can we like literally write all of the code we need to? And I think the answer was kind of yes in retrospect, but wasn't obvious at the time. The other part of it, and something we talked about this morning, I know there's a digits piece of this, but is we also started selling people our product, which one customer called it, was a brutalist white website. It had very little to recommend it, except it worked. Like if you did all the things, a SOC 2 would come out the end, the other side of it. Now, behind the scenes, because we hadn't written all of the testing and all of the evidence mechanisms and controls in code, we were doing a ton of work behind the scenes. And actually, for the first couple of audits, I like flew to our auditor, our first auditor in Denver, and sat next to him and like pulled stuff out of the database. And part of it was like, this just has to work. Like, I will be here to do whatever it is. And part of it was actually to watch him and be like, what are you actually doing when you do an audit? But it was like, customers were buying a fully automated experience. There was a bunch of manual stuff happening behind the scenes done by people because we didn't have the code, like we didn't have the code. But we sort of tried not to expose that to customers for a lot of reasons, including the fact like they didn't care. Like they were buying the outcome for a price and we were supposed to deliver the outcome for a price. And it was sort of like implementation on us of how we got there.
I think it's a
digits piece of that.
They're totally similarities. And I want to dive into that. Like, how do you think about software versus services? And you've partnered with these audit firms.
Yes.
How do you think about bringing that in-house, keeping it external? Like, how do you bring that to market? Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I now deeply understand why founders like full stack startups. I think before I was like, sure, but that kind of sounds like, again, hubris. Like I'm just better at, everybody else in the world at doing things. So, my startup should do everything. And my take now is it's actually really, these partnerships can be really hard because in our case, we hand a customer to an auditor during their audit, like heightened emotional sensitivity, heightened time of need. If they haven't been through an audit, they feel like they're like taking the SAT times 1,000. And we just give the customer to an auditor and be like, hopefully everything is going well over there. Like have fun, like let us know how it goes. And in the early days, some auditors treated our customers better than others. And there were lots of reasons for that, some of which were legitimate and some were, I think, were less so. But it was really hard. And I think what's happened over time is we've gotten much clearer on these partnerships of like, here's our side, here's our value proposition to you, auditor. Here's like the pros and cons of that. And you can opt in. And if you opt in, like, here's what that looks like. And if you opt out, cool, great, make your own decision. But just gotten clearer. So there's fewer misalignments between Vanta and the auditor that then a customer just gets stuck in, which is not good. A ton of battle scars from that. And kind of your earlier question, the reason we haven't in-housed it is because the AICPA is not clear about whether you can do that. And so some folks in the space have, some haven't. We've taken the stance of like, it's not clear, so we're going to take the more conservative stance because we don't want to get on the wrong side. But that is a place where, like, again, left or right, either way.
And it's been really interesting because for years in Silicon Valley, maybe decades, it's been like, no, don't touch services, just do software, like that's what scales. And now that attitude among investors is definitely changing, where it's not just like SaaS is the software, but it's actually the software and a service all together. And that's how you can provide this integrated customer experience.
Yeah, which I do, it's like you're getting into, or I'm getting into trope territory, but like it is so important, and it is so much harder when, again, you're dealing with another organization that, again, might be kind of fully aligned on paper and the best version of it, but just as different incentives, different systems, different stuff has happened in their day-to-day. It's so hard to keep those things together.
Totally. And so let's talk about competition for a second. You were one of the first movers in the space, obviously.
Yes.
Then a whole bunch of competition showed up.
Yes.
How did that change your strategy? How did you react? What did you do?
Yeah, whole roller coaster here. I think, so we stayed slightly similar, slightly different. We stayed very quiet about what we were doing for the first year and a half. It was actually, we knew it was working. It was not that, but it was working so well. We knew there would be knockoffs. And so we wanted to stay as quiet as possible, grow with like compound 3% a week for a year and a half, until we sort of announced what we were doing so that we could get out in front of competition. I think I pushed that 3 to 6 months too long in retrospect. Like by the time we went out, there were a couple other people, and because we hadn't said anything, everyone sort of assumed we were all the same size, which is part of why actually we made such a splash about our fundraise. Was like, no, we are not the same size here. Like, here is this. Like here are numbers. Here is data. Like, come on. But I think now, kind of, again, having ridden that wave, we had a couple of super aggressive competitors whose whole thing was like, well, we're Vanta but better, and like Vanta sucks in these 5 ways, and like boo them, basically. And I think, you go through the like, ouch, that just hurts, and like, I haven't even met you. Like, why do you hate me so much? Phases, which I don't know, maybe or like, I don't think they're helpful, but maybe you have to go through them. And then in the like Vanta sucks for these 5 reasons, like I don't suck, but like we did mess those 5 things up. And so I do think, there's a little bit of like pointing out things we maybe knew but weren't focused on or should have fixed. Customers totally benefited. Because I think as much as we tried to be, wanted to be, thought we were customer focused, we sort of were letting, I think, the like early success get to our heads. And again, it did not feel that way in the moment at all. It felt like the opposite. But in retrospect, I think that was kind of what was happening. And so I think the influx of competition like forced us to be like, oh, yes, we created this thing and that's great, but like the blessing and curse of software is you're only as good as the last thing you shipped. Mm-hmm. And we did mess these 5 things up, and like this part of the product does kind of make no sense and is super confusing. And so it just, after we kind of got through the grieving period, like, forced us to go back and fix those things. And I think we got a lot sharper for, like, as a company, like Vanta, like the company is way more resilient. The product is way better. We are way more focused on customers. Like, again, it's now kind of being on the other side of what kind of felt like a gauntlet at times. But customers are way better off for it.
How did you counter position? Like, you made a bunch of changes internally.
Yes.
How do you communicate that to the market?
Oh, I don't know if we even do that well today. What do I think? I think, actually, so I mean, jokes aside, like I think we actually still struggle sometimes to explain the differentiation, especially for startups. But the thing we at some point realized work and now use is, and if you bought Vanta, we may have pushed you into doing a trial and encourage you to go to get trials of competitors. Because basically, I mean, like now our win rate's quite high, but our win rate is like, I don't know, 9 out of 10 if we're doing head-to-head trials. And so like there is something in the product experience that we are unable to explain credibly when we're like walking through a slide deck with a customer, but if they go try us and try someone else, they will like come back again 9 out of 10 times. And so I think at some point we kind of realized that, and it just became, okay, push everything into trials. Mm-hmm. And we still do a lot of that. I'd still love to find the like, what is the thing there, the magic moment? Like, what do people come out and say beside, your integrations are better, or like this part of the product works? Like, what is credible? But I think there was a lot of like the proof is in the pudding. But actually,
it's funny. I mean, we see the exact same thing. 'Cause a lot of people ask like, oh, why is Digits better than like this accounting firm? And I'm like, well, it's a little hard to explain, but why don't I just show you the product and like what you get? And they're like, oh, okay, all right, this does seem way better.
Yeah.
And so I feel that it's tough to
there's
articulate.
like something there.
Yeah. All right, let's get super tactical. Growth hacks, customer acquisition. What's been the most successful strategy you've used so far?
Well, in the very early days, it was word of mouth, which makes us sound very cool. One of the actual things, and it helped having not raised money for a while, like Series A for a while, was VCs would email and ask to meet. And I would say, oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm just too busy closing customers, just like way too busy over here running a successful business. I didn't quite say that, but I was like, I'm like so sorry. So many things going on. About to launch this new thing. Like, would love to meet, but like now, this month's not the great time. But if you want to get to know Vanta, the best thing you can do is send over some of your startup, your investments to Vanta that need what we do, and just follow them through the sales process and see what they think. And like that is the best diligence you can do, and that is you will learn more than anything I could tell you. And so we just had people sending us customers left, right, and center. And this worked really well. I mean, it works until you then raise, like you could choose a horse and raise money, and then everybody else will stop sending you customers and might invest in your competitors and send them customers. So this definitely has a shelf life. But in the early days, it was really effective, and I'm being very jokey about it now, but I actually do believe it is the best diligence an investor can do. Again, I can, say whatever I want, and hopefully I'm truthful and credible and very much try to be, but just having someone go through Vanta, again, will like teach them way more than anything I could say. I actually do believe that. So that was a big thing. I think, and so good, in the early days, and we kind of focused on this and tried to encourage it, this like call response of if someone said SOC 2 in an in-person meetup, a founder Slack group, a accelerator forum, HN, whatever, we wanted someone to say Vanta. So it was this call response of like SOC 2, Vanta, SOC 2, Vanta. And it worked in the early days, and it was awesome. That was what the word of mouth was. It then became kind of painful because we were associating ourselves with this standard we did not control that anyone else could offer, and people could offer at different levels of quality and at very different price points. And so it's kind of like in the short term, it was like amazing. And then it kind of set us up for commoditization, right? Because you're just pointing at a thing anybody can point to. And so over time, we've very much changed that messaging. And now we talk about automated compliance, and we talk about GRC and trust management, and put a lot of the emphasis in the software as the truly differentiated thing, not the standard, because there's lots of cheap ways to get a SOC 2 today. But that and how that changed.
That's awesome. All right, I want to transition a couple more topics, then we'll open it up for questions. I want to transition internally. Let's talk about sort of culture for a moment. And so as the company scaled, you said you're now over 500 people. How do you maintain the vision, maintain the culture? Like, what's your sort of leadership style been internally?
Yeah, I think a lot. So some things I've learned, a ton of repetition, way more than I ever wanted or kind of want, but I'm like fully on board with how much it's valuable, / when I don't do it, what happens. We spend a ton of time and emphasis on onboarding. So all the leaders at Vanta actually spend probably an hour at least every 2 weeks with all of the new hires. Like not just their team, like, 0 with the engineers, like it does not matter. And I think there's kind of vision parts of that. I think there's accessible parts of that, like to the culture point, again, good and bad, but I am a very like leaders eat last, like sometimes through a fault sort of person. And and it's hard as we grow because like I truly am a like, real person, and sometimes people join and they kind of they treat me like the founder, not like a real person, and you want to like kind of do what you can to be like, no, real person here, promise. We do have principles. We refresh them like every 6 months, which is in some ways kind of aggressive. And not like we're changing major things, but we're usually like swapping something every 6 months. And again, kind of aggressive, but the thinking there is like, I don't want to be, there used to be the Enron posters on the wall that says like honesty and, transparency and whatever accuracy, like that deeply scary. It actually like deeply scares me that could happen at Vanta, or someone could feel that way at Vanta. And so a bunch of emphasis there. And then I think actually as you're scaling, all the like tricks people say that sound so dumb, like, do promotions off of principles and reward them and have the rewards be promotions and compensation and hire off of them, and you're like, does that all actually work? But like, yes, it's kind of magic where that like almost like process tweak actually does drive a lot.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Have there been any sort of tough lessons learned, sort of leadership wise? Like, what mistakes have you made? Yeah,
God, everyone, there exists. What's interesting? Never hire when hungry.
Never hire when hungry.
Never hire when hungry.
I love that.
Probably actually literally physically hungry, but the like hiring when hungry to me is like, oh my gosh, I just need a head of marketing, right? And it's because we have no marketing, or like I have this like nascent marketing team and they're all really unhappy and there's no leader, and like I don't know the first thing about marketing, and like all of that. And so you're like, oh, okay, well, this person like is credible and recommended and has a good background and my like investors like them and like seems really nice. Look, maybe you should hire that person, but you should definitely not hire them on that basis. Don't hire when you're metaphorically hungry for the role to be filled. Because if you make a mishire, you have just made it, like you've made that sad team way sadder, right? And you've prolonged their sadness by like 6 months if you're doing it well, but like probably a year, all in. And so sitting and waiting for the hire that feels right. The most recent hire I made was last year, was our chief product officer, which I was scared of that hire because like everyone messes up that hire. It is so important and like everyone screws it up. And we kind of desperately needed someone in that role or a bunch of pieces of that role. And I spent 12 months on the hire. I think I had people at Vanta like basically wanting to kill me. I mean, everyone's very nice and they didn't actually, but they were kind of like, what is she doing? Right? Like, doesn't she understand that like this is on fire, this is breaking, this isn't working, like this is da-da-da. I had the recruiting firm go try to hire or charge me twice because they're like, this is such a long search. It's like we're doing 2 searches, so we'd like to charge you twice. Just said no, like played chicken, and they backed off. Which is like also a useful skill. I'm sitting ready to be like, that's cool, you can walk away. Like, I'm over it too, it turns out. They didn't walk away, it was fine. We all closed. Everyone was happy when it was done. But anyway, we now have this chief product officer named Jeremy. He's wonderful. He was great. And he just hit, I think 13 months at Vanta, right? And wonderful. And I think most people now forget how long it took. Maybe not. Maybe I just think everyone forgot how long it took. But I kind of still stand by. There was not someone in the process we should have hired earlier. And I think if we had, I don't think it would have worked. So I do think that like deep patience, even when like it feels like the world around you is burning, is pretty helpful.
That's awesome. All right, let's end on one personal note, and then we'll open it up to questions. I'm curious, work-life balance isn't really a thing for founders.
Yeah.
But how do you manage your own well-being? How do you maintain resilience? Like, what have you learned?
Yeah, I actually do think this is like so important and under-talked to. It's just like keeping yourself stable. Mm-hmm. Again, when like everything around you sometimes feels like it's burning and like everyone's annoyed at best. And it's really not helpful if you're, annoyed or off-center. Having also learned that one the hard way in various forms. And so, again, I think it's like a personal question, not in a sensitive way, but in a like, the answer is different for every person. And the thing I actually tell folks who are early founders, want to be founders, is just, if you don't know, figure out what makes you feel happy and centered and don't give up on those things. And so for me, it is like some combination of like running and reading books, because these are things I've done for like 3 decades of my life. And like now cooking, I think just it's like an activity without a screen. But like, anyway, it sort of doesn't, like mine are all very boring things. Some people are very exciting things, but it sort of doesn't matter. It's just like, what are the things where it's like, okay, if I don't run however often, like I will become a less good person, full stop, right? Like, and so it does not matter, and just hang on to them. And like really understanding what makes you, again, happy, centered, stable, I think is like one of the more important things for founders that like that's not on the pre-founder checklist. It kind of should be, I think.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these thoughts.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. All right, what can we answer from the audience? And do we have a mic? I think we do. Great. We have a mic there.
Hello, Tess. Thank you so much. You spoke briefly about the challenge of getting investors excited about what you're doing. I know that that's a challenge that people face with hiring very early on as well. Yeah. And so loved the story about this recent hire, but I'm sure that process was very, very different than when you were a small company. Could you talk more about that, especially because you're in a back office discipline, and that's can be harder to get people excited about.
Yeah, this was so hard. We were so bad at hire. Well, we're so bad at, I also made every hiring mistake times 10 in the book. So our first hires, though, it was funny because we thought we'd smash it out of the park. You're great backgrounds, know all these people from school, worked at these shiny companies in engineering and product disciplines. We got this. Didn't have it turned out. I think what we found was, it might have been problem space, honestly, although no friend said that to our face. It was just, we were 10 years into our career at that point, and everyone had these good jobs, managing a team or a team of teams, and they'd also just gotten a mortgage and, Bernal, and didn't really want to go sit in a smelly room and make $140K to work on this security compliance thing, right? So I think, anyway, all the network, we kind of did the network hiring. I think where I ended up on early hiring strategy is there isn't one. You just have to do everything. And then, follow what works. But trying to have a strategy, it's kind of the very early stages of a startup. Your strategy is figure out what works. And then you can say you have a strategy. Anyway, so what worked for us was, it was actually a bunch of the, angel listy, triple bite. I don't know how many of these things are still around, but these engineer hiring things. And we kind of thought there'd be adverse selection. I don't actually think there was. I think we're just being snobby. But what was really useful was it was engineers who wanted a job now versus all the Dropbox engineers we were talking to were oh yeah, I got this mortgage and also maybe I'll want a job sometime in the next 36 months. And you're what is 36 months? I don't know what 36 months is. Anyway, so it was those, and then it was the early folks were want to come sit in a smelly room and write a lot of TypeScript and learn a lot about customers and product with us. And it was kind of that, and it actually, again, I'm joking, but in a very sincere way. And it was want to come on this wacky journey, and you will certainly learn things. I'm not sure if it'll be, remunerative, but it'll be remunerative with your thoughts. So there was some of that. I think as we got going, and it wasn't come be one of the first 3-5 engineers. It was the business was doing well, and we were customer focused, and so it was come work with customers. We don't have PMs. The business is learn, you want to sit on a sales call? Cool. You want to answer, hang out with support? Cool. Everything is in one room. You can do it all and see how this all comes together. More that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, Christina. Also a YCLM. I'd love for you to talk through your seed to Series A journey and what kind of things affected you in making the decision to pause or, go faster. Typically you'd see companies going into Series A at, I don't know, 2 million, 5 million ARR, right? Is that just that number, or is there more that goes into that decision? And what are the key things, whether it's hiring, ARR, or something else that you thought about in that journey?
Yeah, we did it in, again, kind of an untraditional way where we raised our Series A at $10 million of ARR. It was kind of the wanting to be oh, we have a thing, let's see how far we can get out. There was a bunch of stuff that went into it. And we kind of didn't need the money. Because if I have one tip, it is charge all of your customers annually upfront. It sounds silly, but it is in fact amazing. And that is how we got to $10 million of ARR with 50 people at the time on $3 million in the bank. But anyway, if you want to know more about that, Google, there's a blog post from Peter Reinhardt. It's he's the founder of Charm now, but Segment before, and it's called Finance for Startup Founders. It's a 2-part blog post. Like, read that. It will explain it better than I ever can. But anyway, we did it in a funny way. I think the ARR metrics are helpful guardrails, if only because it's what a lot of people do, so it's kind of the bucket VCs will put you in, right? If you go try to raise a Series A at, I don't know, 400K, like you might be able to pull it off, but it'll be a little bit of like, well, can't we just wait till you have more traction and I can get more conviction before I invest in you? Just like a really annoying answer, but something VCs like to say. I think what they're looking for like signs of product market fit though. And so again, just as much as where you are in ARR, that growth rate matters a ton, right? So you can like take the extreme, you've been around for 10 years, you narrow at $1 million, you got to raise, it will not be fun. And so what they're really looking for is there product market fit? Is this something people want? And is there some semblance of a go-to-market motion? Like if it's like a high price point and a big company buyer, do they realize they have to do, a sales-led motion? If it is a really low price point, do they know they can't have a human in the sales motion? It's more like that sort of intuition than anything else, I think. I don't know, anything you'd add to that?
No, I agree. I think that's the right way to think about it.
Thank you, Jeff and Christina. Question for you, Christina. I've read kind of a myth or fable of you bringing on your first go-to-market hire. Can you talk about that process and how you got them excited and in the door with momentum?
Oh my God, I was so lucky. My first go-to-market hire is still at Vanta, and it's wonderful. So maybe first step. So came in at about 500K of ARR. I had done the first 500K. That was about 50 customers that I had sold. I kind of didn't know whether that was good or bad, truly. But the thing I knew, and the reason that I started talking to people about whether I should hire a salesperson, was the sale had gotten boring to me, which I actually think is important. And what I mean by boring is I would get on actually Google Hangout at the time. We didn't use Zoom, which is wild to think about now. But anyway, I'd get on Google Hangout with usually a founder, and I would like say my words, and we'd go back and forth, and I'd like do the demo, and and I kind of wouldn't, and they'd ask me questions that I like wouldn't think. Like I would just say it because I'd like done it so many times. And I'd send them an order form at the end, and it would like kind of close, or I'd put them in a trial, and I'd sort of ignore them for 7 days, and then I'd send them the order form, and then it would close. And I I didn't really have to think. And I think one of our investors pointed this out to me, but I actually think that is like an important milestone, because what it means is like the sale is somewhat repeatable. Now, it turns out you have a bunch of founder magic, and it's like not actually repeatable, so you really need someone special. So I'll get to in a second. But I do think like when it feels boring to you, there's something repeatable about what you're doing, and so someone else could do it. So anyway, I got to the point, decided we want a salesperson. Again, the strategy was do all the things, aka no strategy. And so it was like, email every investor, like ask friends, like who should we talk to? Got, I can't remember Lions or Bets, I get them confused, but like one of the sales recruiting agencies didn't think that would work because of the adverse selection problem. All the things. And through one of the sales agencies, this guy named Eric emailed, and he was just coming off a company called DataFox that was like had sold this go-to-market tool and had just sold to Oracle, and so the company was sort of like getting sucked into Oracle. And I think I got really lucky in a bunch of ways. One, that he replied. Two, that we actually knew a bunch of people in common, and so we didn't know each other, but he was really easily able to reference check me and I him. And so I think actually in the first conversation, there was like a lot more commonality than, like I felt like I was talking to a friend of a friend, not like a random candidate from a sales agency who, probably sucks. And I put him through a couple candidates. Because again, I have like 4 candidates that we used to have these super complicated interview processes that, again, in retrospect, I think we thought we were being smart. We were just covering for the fact we didn't know what we were doing. And so we wanted like every data point that existed. And so there was this like 4-stage interview where you had to like email me and call me and sell me something. And like, I don't know, like do cartwheels in the office. Like it was so dumb, but he put up with it. And he did really well at each stage. And then I think the thing that sealed it for him, and he was the only candidate, he asked to watch me sell Vanta. And so I invited him onto one of my boring calls, and I think he was like kind of horrified by what I was doing. Because again, I didn't actually know what I was doing. but then he was also like, it worked and he could tell it was working. And so I think I could kind of see it in his eyes. Now I can like really see it because I know him. He was just like, oh my God, I can sell this thing. Like if she's doing that, like, let me add it. And so that's actually what closed in. A couple of the attributes that I think made him so successful that, again, I couldn't have articulated ahead of time, but super curious and like legitimately curious. It helps him do good discovery, but it just helps him like early stage startup. Like he wants to know everything. One of the things we joked about, but he invites his former customers to his Burning Man camp, which is kind of crazy. But for like technical founders who are like worried about like used car salesmen, like this was the opposite. You're like, okay, this guy won't like screw the customers, right? Like he wants to invite them to his Burning Man camp. Weird in a different way, but like good weird. And then I think he had a sales background, but he'd kind of been in AE and he was like totally game to come in and be an AE, but he like also wanted to build a team but didn't expect to do that at all because he'd never done it. And so it was like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to smash my number. Like I will get other people to smash their number. Like we are going. And that's exactly what he did. But super lucky.
That's awesome.
Hey, thanks for the talk. You talked a lot about kind of going from first principles and like the top-down approach of like setting out your fundamentals as a company and then doing a lot of repetition on that. Have you done that for yourself personally? And if so, which of those, did you refresh them as often and which ones need refreshing?
It's a great question. I used to, and I haven't probably since like 2017, 2018, since like Vanta became something that wasn't like two people on a couch. Why did I stop? I don't have a very good reason. I mean, I probably should have kept going. The better version of me would have kept doing it every year. But it's something, maybe the answer is I used to do that because I thought it was helpful, and maybe it was helpful, but I think I found as Vanta has ramped that there's just like other outlets for that energy. And I think some of it was maybe helpful before and some of it was sort of like anxiety almost that like needed another outlet. And now I just have less headspace to do that, I think. Yeah, but I used to.
Great talk so far, thanks. As I went through a couple of startups, there were some advice that like kind of was industry-stranded or you got from investors that when you actually were in the trenches, you realize, okay, it's not right or it's not as nuanced. Are there examples of that you know, you used to get? Like, what are some of those? And then maybe some that, you know, on the other side that you've learned that should be, you know, slogans or whatever. So what slogans were proven wrong by actually doing it?
Gosh, a lot. I think there was a point, again, probably spring 19. Yeah, so probably like a year and a half into having customers where I realized that, and our investors used to kind of they tried to be very helpful, but they would like introduce us to these advisors, like, you know, VP of wherever that was just acquired by whatever, but built the go-to-market at whatever. And, you know, and I think, and you'd have to take those meetings at first because you're like, well, like build at big companies, like, you know, and we're two people in a smelly room. But then I hit a point where I was like, oh, in the first hour at least of these meetings, nothing this person says about Vanta will be something I don't know about Vanta. It turns out I've been like sitting in the mud, right? And it's not that they're not smart. It's just like I am covered in mud. Everything I see is Vanta. And so I should kind of not take these meetings, or I should only take these meetings if I want to spend like many, many, many hours with this person. But the like 1 hour coffee chat of like, so-and-so comes by to talk to you about your first sales hire, like really kind of a waste of time. Unless, again, you're willing to spend like 6 hours with so-and-so. But I think there was like something there, both that changed like how I responded to those like kind requests from investors, which is like, thank you so much, but you know, going to focus on whatever right now, but very much appreciate it. And then also I think there's actually this like internal confidence of like, again, because when you're sitting in all the mud, you're like, I don't know if I know anything. Like I'm just covered in mud, like trying to like make reasonable decisions in a, you know, minute to minute time frame. And I think there was something there of like, again, I've like learned something about Vanta. Not to say I know anything about sales yet, right? But like, I think there's something there, and that actually helped discard a lot of the advice. But I do think most of it's bad, although you should charge annually up front.
One of the things I would add, keep in mind what investors are really good at and have unique experience at versus what you have. They're never going to know your business, your customer, your market better than you will because you're in it every day. They will have tremendous context on what they're seeing. And so I think what's really interesting is when they point you to an adjacent market to pay attention to, or an up-and-coming competitor you don't want to like over-rotate on, but they're great to bring context where you as the founder are like so deep in your thing. But I wouldn't rely on their advice of like them knowing your business better than you. That's a trap.
Very true. Like I kind of fumbled your like, what other spaces are you interested in? I was like, I don't know. I just think about Vanta all the time.
Yeah.
What am I answer? Right. But it's like a great VC question.
Yep.
Right. Because they will have like, oh, I've just met with so-and-so and this thing. Totally.
Where are we?
Thanks, Christina and Jeff. Christina, I listened to your podcast with Bryce recently. He spoke about-
That one was a little off the rails.
Sounded like a lot of fun.
Yes.
I think in it you mentioned how you think that user research as a discipline can sometimes be too academic.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice or lessons on how to do user research well? I feel like it's something that people think, like a lot of people think they know how to do well, but few actually do it exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think it's, I will try. I think it sounds like truisms. I do think there's a bit of like deeply listen to people. Again, it sounds like a truism, but actually it's also very true in recruiting. And try to figure out what people want and then like really, try to be honest and be like, do I have that in my product, in this role, in my company or whatever? But like doing that diff as like honestly as you can, which is hard when you're in the middle of it. Anything that's not a yes is a no. Right. Anything that is like, oh, maybe later, like, oh, but like not me, but my colleague. Those are hard no's. They just, are delivered softly. I do think in industry research, you want to bias your findings. Like your goal is to find something this person wants. Your goal is not, and like that is related to objective truth, but it is not objective truth. And I think one of the places academic research put into industry goes wrong is it's kind of, again, trying to find like, oh, what is the objective truth? And it's like, no, what is the business? Like, how do we get to the business goal? And again, you can't, like, if you don't want to delude yourself, right? So there is like an honesty piece there, but I do think your goal is to like, build something people want. And so it's like, how do you use research to do that? Not like just build research to be like, well, how do people, consider their security consultants and what role might they play in their, compliance journey? In a Vanta context, like that's sort of useful, but we actually want to know is like, at what point in the customer journey should we introduce a security consultant with what qualities that will make the customer most successful? If that makes sense.
In the back.
Thanks, you two, for the great chat. Just one quick question. Christina, you talked a little bit about the notion of kind of recalibrating when competitors came up, which I think is very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what recalibrating meant for you in terms of maybe navigating how you created sense of urgency within the company and new goals maybe, and how you kind of work towards that as a means to kind of more progress and faster progress?
Yeah, it was. So we are a sales touch company. Like if you want Vanta, there's no way to really get it, or there's no way to get it without talking to some person. You can talk to them very quickly, but you got to talk to a person. And so what that means is our sales team and our go-to-market team had an acute awareness of competitor strengths, or what they heard of as competitor strengths and weaknesses, which weren't actually fully accurate, but like super urgent, right? Because they were day in and day out, like faced with this stuff. And basically, again, getting told Vanta sucks for these 5 reasons, and also you're bad and you're getting beaten by whoever. So they got it. Like, if anything with them, it's like help is on the way. Like, don't scatter too much and trying to like maintain some semblance of calm. The much harder part is engineering, product, and design. Because they like don't, they're not in the line of fire on this stuff on purpose. And you kind of don't want them to be minutely like, well, so-and-so built this feature, so we need to build this feature. And you're like, the feature is dumb. No one wants that feature, Anyway, but like transporting the urgency there. And again, in a productive way, not to like, so-and-so is complaining because they lost a deal and that means they'll get paid less, right? Like that is not, well, it means sometimes factually true, not helpful. And so, and we kind of messed this up for a while. And so I think, there's a little bit of bringing together and a little bit of handling separately. I now deeply appreciate how much of sales is a confidence game. And you probably bought SaaS software, and you probably talked to reps who seemed very confident in what they were selling, and reps who were not confident in what they were selling. And I think, people can smell that on one another very quickly. And so rebuilding these sales and success teams' confidence was something I would now do much faster, because it kind of took us a while to both realize, and then took us even longer to figure out how to do. Tried lots of pep talks, so it's like not it. Turns out actually the only thing that makes salespeople confident is other salespeople who are confident. And so what we actually did was got a couple of them confident winning. And then that spread way better than anything we did. Any enablement, any pep talk, anything else. Didn't matter. And then on kind of the EPD side, it was starting to actually we started bringing a lot of people into calls, especially on customer calls. And so they would kind of have to do the objection handling for some of the product. And, they didn't always love this, but it was like, that was then, you kind of only have to do it once or twice. We also actually ended up bringing partners who had access to kind of lots of products in this space that were trusted and we'd worked with for a while, to just give their take, which wasn't always flattering to us. But that was helpful, because again, that wasn't someone who was like missing their quota. That was, such and such we'd worked with for years. And then just kind of breaking it down and being like, okay, we suck in these 5 ways, fine. But like, how do we break that down into things that can be scoped into projects and acted on and moved on, so it doesn't feel like, I don't know, it's pushing this big boulder up a hill either.
All right, let's do 1 or 2 last questions. Up here. Oh, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Christina. Great insights. Very honest, and I love that. My question is about the stage from ideation to finding product market fit. How long did it take for you? And when did you feel like, yes, this is product market fit? And what are the mistakes you or Vanta team made during this period? Thank you.
Yeah, couple ways of answering, but I guess let's look at security. Who knows what else we're doing with our lives? That was, I think, probably March, April timeframe. The conversation I'm talking about with the Google shopping list was May. Started SOC 2 consulting in June. It's all 2018. The life intervention / can you be a SOC 2 consultant at my company email was April. It's kind of when we started coding. First customer was January 18. I think along then there were points where it felt like there was demand or there was pull, and also just not that many people knew about it either. And then often it would bounce off, especially small companies, because they'd say, I don't need a SOC 2. I think it probably didn't. I think there was, though, a moment the next spring, so spring of 19, again, when I was selling prior to Eric coming in, and I could tell that I was doing better than I should. Again, because it's like I joke, but the last thing I sold prior to Vanta was Girl Scout cookies. And I read all the sales books, but I did not know what I was doing. And so I should not have been able to close 2-3 deals a week. And I think at the time I remember thinking I'd like to think it's just I'm a fast learner and great skills. It wasn't, it was the product, right? It was just there was a thing here that people wanted. So there's probably something there in the this is going way better than it has any rights to. And it must be it's because people actually want this thing.
I would say, and I'm curious, to me, PMF is a very visceral experience.
Yes.
If you don't know you have it, you do not have it.
This is so
It is completely binary.
Yes.
And I tweeted literally in December, I was like, oh my God, I think we have PMF. And it's just that feeling, and you're like, that is magical. And so, but it's this hunt that you have to get there, and you tweak certain things, and all of a sudden it clicks, and it goes from feeling like you're fighting for every sale, or fighting to make the product communicate what you want it to people are pulling you and they want it. All right, last question, one more. Let's go over here. Oh, sorry to make it all the way around.
So this was a really great discussion. I really appreciate what you said about your investors using your product to help you get them to invest in you. But I wanted to ask you about your interaction with your board and some advice on how you can do that well.
Yeah. So I was really lucky to start my career at an early stage venture firm, Union Square Ventures in New York. And one part of that job was I sort of follow the partners around to board meetings and like sit very quietly in the corner. Like, 23 and really didn't know which way was up. But that experience made me very scared of boards because as far as I could tell, boards were like 7 to, 14-person rooms full of people posturing and playing a status game. And like they were talking about the company, but they weren't talking about the company. The company is just kind of this like ping pong ball being pinged around. And again, to be clear, the people I worked for, the guys I worked for were great. And they were like, not this. People are great. But the experience made me very scared of having a board. And so delayed making one for a while. Even now, Vanta's board is 3 people. So I would say, to the extent it's not too late, keeping the board small and with people who are comfortable in their status at work, but kind of actually that like, they want your company to succeed. They clearly are financially motivated, et cetera. But like, if it doesn't, they'll be fine. And they know that too. They kind of miffed, but like they will be fine. I think is helpful because then it is easier to talk about like the actual issues versus like, oh, well, if this doesn't work, then and then I can't raise a new fund and blah, 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 won't make partner or whatever. Like that you don't want in your boardroom. I think if you can have a small constructive boardroom, like you can touch it, or we are very honest with our board. But again, because it is small in that, if we had an 8-person board with posturing, it would be like much more buttoned up and much more like, everything is fine here. Thank you so much. This is kind of performative. And then we will go to the actual work outside of this room to interrogate the metrics and make sure they're better. So I kind of do think there's like a hard fork there. But again, at the early stages, to the extent you can keep your board small with people who, again, may or may not be investors. Like our 3-person board is me, an investor, and an independent who's a like operator and founder. And people who like just want the company to work and help problem solve. That's kind of the best case.
I could not agree more strongly with that. So I saw Twitter's board firsthand. This is pre-Elon. Completely dysfunctional, 12 people, everyone posturing, no one knew anything. Half of them had never used Twitter, which crazy for a product of that popularity. And so we did the same thing. Our board's 3 people. It's night and day. It like highly recommend be extremely disciplined who you put on the board. Do not offer board seats in a round unless you really like that specific partner. Probably one of the most important things you can do. This is awesome. I want to end with one last question, which is, you've done the Series C. What's next for Vanta? What do you see going forward?
Oh, we got a lot to build. A lot to do. So I think where broadly, there's a bunch of compliance stuff we still do and we'll do, and compliance is very important to our customers and us. I think, again, we're kind of getting to also build into adjacent security domains, which is like very fun. Because again, it was like, this was the pitch in 2018, but like actually like kind of having product against it is very cool. So that is a big focus. There's a bunch of AI stuff, again, kind of with customers, but like so much of compliance is mapping things to things and information and text in one format to another. So there's like a ton of cool stuff there that I'm very excited about. And then brief plug, but we, about a year and a half ago, I announced these, call them trust centers, but these security status pages. So if you're like trust.lumos.com, you get Lumos' status page, trust.vanta.com. And it's like an uptime page, but for your security. And the core idea there is like when you put up an uptime page, your uptime improves because you don't want to have bad uptime. And like, can you do that for security and use a lot of like the accolades and the trust building with customers, and here's all this information to actually drive better security behavior in companies. I think we now have, we actually share the number, but a couple thousand trust pages across the internet, which is like very cool. It's companies that are like, we are kind of so confident in our security posture and our ability to respond when things change, as they always do, that we will just put this on, like put a status page on the internet. There's a lot more we'll put behind that. I'm very excited about, like very mission aligned.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really fantastic. Really appreciate it.